The battlefield was Rome's classroom. For centuries, its legions marched across continents, their discipline, formations, and tactics unmatched. Enemies broke against them like waves on stone. But what happens when that stone begins to crack, when the very strategies that built the Roman Empire are stolen, reshaped, and hurled back with devastating force? Imagine it. Roman soldiers advancing in perfect unison, shields locked, spears braced. Their enemies should scatter, as they always had. But instead, the foes hold. They fight in the Roman style, flanking, feinting, drilling with precision once thought impossible for barbarians. Rome's greatest strength was discipline, but it also became their weakness. Because once their rivals learned Rome's playbook, the empire faced warriors who could beat them at their own game. Today, we uncover the story of how Rome's enemies, Carthage, the Gauls, even the so-called barbarian tribes, turned Rome's weapons of war into their own, and how these borrowed tactics nearly broke the empire from within.
Rome did not invent the concept of organized armies. Phalanxes marched with the Greeks, and disciplined formations fought in Persia long before Rome became more than a village on the Tiber. But Rome perfected it. Their legions became a machine, a brutal blend of training, flexibility, and iron resolve. From Spain to Judea, Africa to Britain, Rome's reputation spread. Resist and be crushed beneath their system of war. But Rome also had a fatal flaw: arrogance. They believed their way of war was so superior that no outsider could ever master it. Yet history shows again and again that when Rome conquered, others watched. Captives learned in Roman camps. Rebels trained in Roman armies before turning on their masters. Ambitious kings studied Rome's victories, then reforged those lessons into sharper blades. This is how Rome's fiercest enemies were born. Not from wilderness or chaos, but from the very shadow of Rome itself.
The first and most famous example comes from Carthage and one man, Hannibal Barca. He grew up in a city locked in rivalry with Rome, watching his father fight them during the First Punic War. By the time Hannibal faced Rome himself, he had studied their methods with the patience of a predator. At Cannae, in 216 BCE, he unleashed one of the most brilliant reversals in history. The Romans advanced in their traditional massed formation, certain their numbers would crush Hannibal's smaller army. Instead, Hannibal mirrored their order, pulling his center back deliberately while keeping his cavalry strong on the wings. Rome pressed forward, too eagerly. The Carthaginian wings encircled them in a perfect crescent, and Rome's proud legions were swallowed whole. Nearly 50,000 Romans died that day, destroyed not by foreign chaos, but by their own tactics turned against them. But Hannibal was not alone. Across the empire, others took notes. The Germanic tribes, once dismissed as disorganized raiders, learned to form shield walls and ambush columns with Roman precision. Arminius, a Germanic noble raised as a Roman officer, used his training to devastating effect at the Teutoburg forest in 9 CE. He lured 3 Roman legions into a narrow woodland pass, cut them off, and annihilated them, proof that Rome's enemies could learn and adapt. Even in the East, the Parthians borrowed Roman siege methods. Though famed for cavalry, They captured Roman engineers and forced them to teach the secrets of Roman artillery. Against Rome, they could now fight on equal terms in both open field and fortress assault.
By the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, Rome faced enemies who were no longer just imitators, but innovators. The Goths, Vandals, and Huns combined their own traditions with stolen Roman tactics. The result was hybrid warfare Rome had not prepared for. The Goths, led by Fritigern at Adrianople in 378 CE, trapped and destroyed a Roman army led by Emperor Valens. How? By using Roman-style feigned retreats, hidden reserves, and disciplined cavalry maneuvers. What should have been another Roman victory became one of their worst defeats, with an emperor dead and an army shattered. The Vandals, too, used Rome's naval methods against them. Once considered land raiders, they seized Roman ships, trained crews in Roman fashion, and by the 5th century controlled the Mediterranean, cutting Rome off from its lifeblood of grain. The empire that once ruled the seas was outmaneuvered by its own stolen playbook. And perhaps most chilling of all were the Huns. Though not directly Roman-trained, they absorbed Roman siegecraft and tactical formations through captured deserters and allies. Attila himself employed Roman engineers to build siege engines, using the empire's own knowledge to batter its frontier cities. Rome now faced a terrifying mirror. The empire's enemies no longer fought like barbarians. They fought like Rome.
The decline of Rome's military dominance was not just the fault of outside pressure. It was also the cost of teaching the world how to fight. Every enemy who survived a clash with Rome carried away lessons. Defectors, mercenaries, and captured soldiers spread knowledge of formations, supply systems, and siege tactics. As Rome weakened politically, its enemies grew stronger militarily. They no longer needed to outnumber Rome. They needed only to outmaneuver it with Rome's own tricks. Over time, the mystique of the Roman legion faded. What was once an unstoppable war machine was now a blueprint used by all. By the late Empire, Rome's enemies were fighting with Roman discipline, Roman armor, even Roman weapons. And Rome itself was hiring barbarians trained in Roman methods to defend its borders. The lines blurred. Rome was no longer unique, and its empire began to unravel.
Though Rome fell, the idea of its military system did not. In fact, it lived on most strongly in those who once opposed it. The Germanic kingdoms that carved up Rome's remains carried forward legionary discipline into medieval armies. The Byzantine Empire, Rome's eastern half, learned bitterly from Adrianople and adapted by blending Roman and barbarian tactics into a flexible hybrid force. Even today, echoes of this story remain. Modern military academies still study Hannibal's use of Roman methods at Cannae. His encirclement has been repeated in battles from Frederick the Great to World War II. The shield walls of Germanic tribes evolved into pike squares of medieval Europe, and later into modern infantry formations. Rome's enemies proved a timeless truth. No tactic, no system of war remains the sole property of one nation forever. Once revealed, it becomes the world's, and sometimes it is the student who surpasses the master. So, the question lingers: did Rome fall because its enemies grew stronger, or because Rome taught them too well?
Rome built its empire on discipline, order, and the belief that its way of war was eternal.
But its enemies learned those very lessons, adapting them until Rome's legions faced their own reflection across the battlefield. From Hannibal's brilliance to Arminius's betrayal, from Gothic ambushes to Vandal fleets, the empire was undone, not by chaos, but by its own genius turned against it. Rome may have erased cities and crushed nations, but its own tactics ensured its enemies would rise sharper, deadlier, and more prepared. History's greatest irony is that the empire that taught the world how to fight could not withstand the world fighting like Rome. If you enjoyed uncovering how Rome's enemies stole their secrets and nearly destroyed them, make sure to like this video, share it with a fellow history lover, and subscribe for more forgotten stories of the ancient world. Because sometimes the best way to defeat an empire is to learn directly from it.